Good morning. Welcome to the International Democracy Day, September the 15th, 2022. This session is about women's rights under Vietnamese communism, brought to you from the Alliance of Vietnam's Democracy, in partnership with the Global Democracy Coalition. I'm Lin Nguyen and I will be moderating. In the next hour, the speakers will reflect their research on the subject of Gender Economic Inequality in Vietnam from Dr. Tu Nguyen, PhD. A Political Inequality for Vietnamese Women from Ms. Ta Nguyen, Christina Ta, JD. Human trafficking, sexual assault, exploitation, the plights of Vietnamese women and girls from Ms. Nha, LPC. Gender Inequality in Vietnam, Education, from Mr. Hung Phan, MED, and Inequality in Health and Security from Dr. New Phúc Nguyen, MD. Thereafter, we will have a question and answer session. Please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A tab, and we will end with a closing remark. But let's begin with the opening remarks from Dr. Nhất Thiên Nguyen, PhD. Dr. Nguyen is a professor of criminal justice, University of Houston Downtown, and president. He is also president of the Vietnam Democracy Center. Please welcome Mr. Nguyen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the International Democracy Day. The chairman of Russian oil giant Lukoil, Ravil Markinov, has died after falling from a window in a Moscow hospital, according to the Russian state media. Previously, Mr. Markinov has spoken out against the war in Ukraine. Similarly, China's sweeping national security law in 2020 in Hong Kong is an attempt to silence and arrest anyone for speaking out against its one-party rule system and policies. In Vietnam, a noodle seller famous over a viral video that was widely viewed as mocking a top government official has been arrested, the latest in a crackdown on critics of the country's communist rulers. Whether you are in Russia, China, or Vietnam, any criticism against the government is met with arrest or death. The Alliance for Vietnam Democracy is proud to be part of the International Democracy Day to present women's rights under Vietnamese communism. Our goal is to give voices to the Vietnamese women who are severely punished for voicing their concerns over women exploitation and inequality under communist rule. Our distinguished expert panel will present the 5 topics to further expand and shed light on this issue. First, economic inequality. Second, political inequality. Third, sex and human trafficking. Fourth, education inequality. And fifth, healthcare inequality. Again, thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Our first speaker will be Dr. Nguyen, also Dr. Tu Nguyen. He will speak on gender economic inequality in Vietnam. And he has research and he has earned the MA in economics, an MS in mathematics, and a PhD in monetary and financial economics, completely supported by Charles Taft Fellowship in the University of Cincinnati. He is the former professor of economics and finance, chairman of the FAMIS department, and director of the Office of Research Report. He is also the head of the Economic Analysis and Forecast Department at the 5th District of the Federal Home and Loan Bank System. He has published over 90 research papers in reputable U.S. and international academic journals and a book. Please welcome Dr. Du Nguyen.
Good morning. Do you guys see my PowerPoint on the screen? Hello?
We have not.
Is there
You
any
want
way
to
in
take?
Hưng can you get it up for me, please?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'm. This is an honor to be here. Uh, Let me get my PowerPoint up. Is it up?
Please give us another minute. Could you keep talking and begin your presentation, and we will have it up momentarily?
Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay. Uh, okay. Uh, It is an honor to be here to speak on the gender economic inequality in Vietnam. Like most people, I am always short of money and time, so I will. Uh, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please go
Okay.
ahead with your
Okay.
with
Okay.
your
Okay.
speech. We can hear
Uh,
you.
as always, as like most other people, I always am short of money and time. So I will briefly present a hypothesis on root causes of the disadvantages and cite some data to support this conjecture. There's a great deal more of data which I cannot review in this time frame. So a gender economic gap is one of the four components of the global gender gap, which is an international phenomenon. It's happened everywhere, not only in Vietnam. In 2006, the World Economic Forums has calculated and introduced a concept called Global Gender Gap Index, known as GGGI, and introduced as a benchmark progress towards gender parity. So annually, a GGGI is calculated based on the data across four dimensions: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. By 2022, the global gender gap has been closed by 68.1%, which still leave us with a gap of 31.9%. Look at it at the current recent rate of progress. It is estimated it will take another 132 years, another 3 or 4 generations for us to reach the full parity. So this presentation is based on the comparison of informations on the Vietnamese gender economic gap to those in the GGGI to evaluate the reported economic inequality of women in Vietnam. So here is the some selected data on the international as well as some regional areas about the gender gap. Um, that's I don't know if you see. Can you get it up for me, or I have to continue to talk here? Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, Dr. Du, did you
Yeah,
ask a question?
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, okay, okay. The problem is we don't have a PowerPoint up, so. But anyways, in this report, I'm going to select it. I'm going to provide some selected data on the international community as well as some country where the information where the gender gap is very good and some is very bad. So first, I reported the gender gap for the sub uh, component for economics, education, health, and political empowerment, and the overall index. So for the globals, the sub-index for economic opportunity was 60.3. For education for the international community as a whole, the index is 94.4. The health, the sub-index is 95.8, and political empowerment is 22 and the gender gap index for 2022 for the international community is 68.1. For Vietnam, the sub-index for economic opportunity is 75.1. That ranked Vietnam to be number 31st out of 146 country reported. And for the gender gap index for Vietnam, it was 70.5, ranked Vietnam number 83. And also the country like Iceland, Finland, Norway, New Zealand, and Switzerland are those 5 countries have the highest index, meaning lowest gap. The 5 countries, Chad, Iran, Congo, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, are those countries that have the lowest index, therefore the highest gap in the international community. As to a Vietnam historical ranking, the 2016 economic opportunity index, sub-index, ranked Vietnam number 33rd out of 156. 2022, Vietnam was ranked number 31st out of 146. Recent study and survey by international institutions have pointed out achievement and progress in closing gender gap in many areas, and some prominent areas that women participation in labor force, women economic contribution to the economy, low restriction on women freedom of movement, decision to run the business, own the property, and so forth. However, the International Labor Organization research have reviewed that despite of the reported achievement and progress above, the Vietnamese economies remain a gender structure as women face consistent formal and societal barriers. I provide here some example of those areas that we have a problem with. Other study also show that serious biases against women's status in the economy. Some of the pressing issue is that the women have faced multiple and persistent inequality. The tax law and the social insurance law and enterprise law is in fact biased against women and so forth. So with all the data, what conclusion can we draw out of this? The first conclusion that we can draw is that the gender inequality in the labor market in Vietnam can be traced back to the traditional roles that women are expected to play, perpetuated by both social norms as well as by the country legislation. The Vietnamese authority has maintained and used these social norms and legal system to advance its self-serving objective to exploit women. By doing so, they hinder the women advancement. In today's age of globalization and international post-truth society, the U.S. and Western policymakers, by and large, have considered the current international, regional, geopolitical, and domestic socio-economic reality, as well as political situation, to make certain assumptions and conclusions about this matter. However, due to the extremely complex and paradoxical nature of these matter, policymakers often have to accept a second best solution to some constituent matter to achieve overall desired short-run foreign policy objective. Unfortunately, the actual outcome of successive short-run policy determine the actuality of the long-run foreign policy. The Vietnamese authority maintain traditional norms, insufficiency in childcare, lack of maternity protection. Furthermore, business dealing by small and medium firms contribute to gender economic inequality and other problems in Vietnam, which is detrimental to economic opportunity for women. The unfortunate situation is that the issue are deeply rooted in the Vietnamese culture and must be changed if we want to to significantly advance gender economic inequality in Vietnam. Also, the communist government allow officials to use social norm to circumvent the legal system, to extract illegal benefit not only for themselves but also for their interest group. This results in gender economic inequality gap that is an integral part of the broader human right violation. The current anti-corruption campaign known as Burning Furnace, initiated by Mr. Zhang, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, review episodes of corruption causing trillions of dollars damages to the country by many high-ranking Communist Party members who were appointed by the party through its deployment of human resources process and remove them some with capital punishment. However, if we look into the situation, you will find that their replacement would be subject to the same rewards, punishment, inducement, and condition will therefore follow the footstep, namely continue to corrupt. We know very well that if the system is not changed, the behavior of people in the system cannot be changed either. So old face, new wine measure will never work. Additionally, the country data maintained and used by international institutions are provided by member countries, especially the communist country. Therefore, the data may not be reliable. More importantly, the reported achievement and progress reported here were based on the data provided by the Vietnamese government, which are unlikely reliable. Finally, geopolitically, Vietnam play a very important role in the stability of the Asian Pacific region, and the Vietnamese population in general is more pro-US than others in this part of the globe. A friendlier Vietnamese government would significantly help the US counter the CCCP and maintain the Pac Americana in the Asian Pacific. So what the U.S. government had to do and what we had to do, I think that the U.S. government should not look into Vietnam through a American culture lenses. Instead, they should seek to understand the Vietnamese culture, traditional norms, and their attendant behaviors and hidden agenda in dealing with the Vietnamese Communist Party and Vietnamese government. This will help result in improving the Vietnamese socio-economic and political condition, including gender, economic inequality, and more productive U.S.-Vietnam relation in almost all aspects. Thank you. I'm sorry for missing the slide.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen, for your insights and your research, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. Next, our next speaker will be Ms. Nhã Nguyen, LPC, on human trafficking, sexual assault, exploitation, the plights of Vietnamese women and girls. Ms. Nguyen is a member of the Alliance for Vietnam's Democracy. As a mental health care provider, she works with school-aged children, refugees and immigrants, the survivors of abuse, the post-Vietnam War prisoners and Vietnam War veterans, and the underprivileged population. Advocating for a democratic Vietnam where all Vietnamese, young and old, male and females, are able to live the life of actual freedom is one that is close to Ms. Nguyen's heart. Please welcome Ms. Nguyen.
Good morning, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be here to present the topic, human trafficking, sexual assault, exploitation, the plight of Vietnamese women and girls. Women and children are victims of domestic and transnational trafficking and sexual violence, sexual exploitation, sexual assault, forced marriage, forced prostitution. Women are also victims of debt bondage, domestic servitude, and children are victims of forced labor and forced begging. The actual statistics of human trafficking in Vietnam remain unknown. The most vulnerable group between 19 and 25 years old. More than 90% of 7,500 victims more than 90% of 7,500 victims identified between 2012 and 2017 were females. In 2019, the UNICEF stated that 5.6% of children in Vietnam may have experiences related to child trafficking. Females are vulnerable to being trafficked across borders due to poverty, lack of education, and awareness about the law and human trafficking. In the north, they were sold at the border to Chinese men or brothels. In the central and southern parts of Vietnam, most victims are trafficked through brokered marriage. These are the ads of mail order brides from Vietnam, which says, for example, buy a wife from Vietnam for only $6,000, guaranteed, virgin, be delivered within 90 days, no extra charges. And if ran away within a year, you get another one for free. From Vietnam, victims either fly or being trafficked to neighboring countries or to China, Russia, Europe. Where they work in marijuana farms or as sex slaves. They are in Africa. They are in the Middle East. And this is the picture of domestic servants in Saudi Arabia asking for help. Some are victims of physical and sexual violence resulted in deaths. Despite the pandemic and closed borders, human trafficking is on the rise within Vietnam and across the borders to China and Cambodia. Women and children are victims of sexual harassments and assaults. Violence against children and women is pervasive but underreported by the government. Women, female teachers, and schoolgirls are frequently subjected to sexual harassment and assault, including in boarding school, by cadres, teachers, government caregivers. In 2019, 164 children were sexually assaulted per month. Children are victims of poverty and forced labors. 5.3% of children aged 5 to 17 were engaged in child labor, over half in hazardous conditions. Traffickers coerce children as young as 6 to work in garment factories under exploitative conditions. Within Vietnam, traffickers may force children to beg or become peddlers on the streets. Children are victims of sexual exploitation. Vietnam has been a popular country for child sex tourism. Children are sold in their hundreds and on the internet sites. So what roles does the party play in smuggling, exporting, and trafficking of Vietnamese citizens? Vietnam is one of the top source countries for its citizens to be smuggled, exported, and trafficked into China, other Asian countries, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Vietnam, Hanoi smuggles citizens since after 1975, when officials registered and collected gold bars and chartered many ships to smuggle citizens to Hong Kong and Malaysia. Vietnam has been exporting its citizens at least since the 1980s, when Hanoi started to export its citizens to the USSR and Eastern Europe to pay for the debts to execute the war, to decrease unemployment rates, to harvest foreign currencies, and obtain economic gains. This graph shows Hanoi exports more females and males. Red, if you can see, red for females, blue for males, and red always exceeds blue. The Communist Party must be responsible for victims' plight due to severe deficiencies in government transparency, accountability, judiciary. Corruption is pervasive in Vietnam. Government officials take part in trafficking activities. High-ranking officials are the most dominant agents in facilitating illicit activities that reflect the impairment in political leadership and the governance and a atrocious policy towards its citizens. As a result, the State Department's 2022 Trafficking in Persons report downgraded Vietnam to Tier 3, which means countries whose governments do not fully comply with the minimum standards and are not making significant efforts to do so. What consequences does the Communist Party cause to victims besides physical, psychological, emotional, vocational, and social consequences? Victims are deprived of identity as a human being and a part of the family, society, and the country. On family, society, and the country. Destroying children is to destroy the future. Destroying women is to destroy families, the fundamental unit of Vietnamese society, and the family relationships between husband and wife and mother and children. Destroying women is to destroy Vietnamese tradition, morality, society, and the civilization that have been existing for nearly 5,000 years. The export of women, children, and young people deliberately create gender imbalances as such in China by exporting and scattering Vietnamese young men and women all over the world. Hanoi is deliberately minimizing the population by minimizing the number of young men and women who can contribute to the society and the country, and the number of women who could give birth to children, the future generations. The strategies to exploit women and children immorally is the most abhorrent strategy of the Communist Party to fulfill China's evil strategy to annex Vietnam and to minimize and sanitize Vietnamese people, because children of Vietnamese women and Chinese men are Chinese. The same sanitization is happening in Tibet and Xinjiang. The only difference is that Vietnamese women are exported across the border. Some are rescued, in parentheses, and transported back to Vietnam. But what happens to their children? This is happening amidst World Bank report of Vietnam's falling birth rates and slowing population growth. The above policy objectives of Vietnamese government are completely opposite to those of democratic governments, which President Nixon clearly articulated in 1967. The people, in the broadest sense, have become an entity to be served rather than used. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen, for your research and sharing this difficult subject. Next, we have Mr. Hung Phan, MED, presenting the topic on gender inequality in Vietnam education. Mr. Phan is the chairman of the board of directors of Vietnam Human Rights Day, May 11th, an advisor and former president of the board of executives of the Federation of Vietnamese American Communities of the USA, founder and advisor of the Republic of Vietnam Next Generations, and former scout leader of the Vietnamese Scout Troop in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is a prominent community activist who champions the ideals of serving others, encourages and trains the young generations to participate in the mainstream politics, and actively promotes freedom, democracy, and human rights for Vietnam. You have the floor, Mr. Fan.
Thank you, Ms. Ling, about your introduction. So today, good morning, everyone. Um, so I'd like to talk about the gender equality in Vietnam education. Although women, men are equal under the law in Vietnam, there's still many glaring disparity in practice. In terms of reform, the Vietnamese government has committed to many guarantees regarding women's rights, and but does not have measurable results to show for that. So based on the global gender index, Dr. Nguyễn Chữ has shared before, uh, which indexes 146 countries, progress toward gender parity based on factors such as political empowerment, economic, participation, health, and education, and the highest possible of score of 1 indicates gender parity. Vietnam ranked 83rd place behind Philippines, Singapore, Laos, and Thailand. Okay. In terms of education attainment, Vietnam is at 88% rate. 88 place, right behind Australia and before Thailand. Regarding the shining data, as some of my colleagues mentioned before, with the caveat that reliability for the data is questionable, as data collection may be skewed to make it look better than it truly is. So, in the women's involvement in national politics, higher education, and overall health trends leave much to be desired. Vietnam has made a extensive legal commitment to guarantee women's rights on paper, but has taken no step in enforce to protect them in practice. Vietnamese women and girls are still regarded as the status of second-class human beings. Based on the research on the project Social Cultural Factor Influence Gender Inequality Vietnam, carried out by the Institute for Social Development studies between 2012 and 2015 from Australia, even though the data old, but the facts still, good until now. There's some interesting fact about gender inequality in education. There's some reason for continuing attending school. Young women are expected to sacrifice their formal education for the benefit of their male sibling and tend to give up their formal education to perform family caregiver roles. Women are also internalized the attitude that women should have lower education attainment than their husband in order to maintain familial harmony. I showed the figure above. Women are more likely to discontinue education due to family-related issues than men. The pattern within the age group is different between men and women, especially women at young age group discontinue education more than men in the same cohort. And gender-based attitude from toward education. As shown in the table above, about 29.39% of respondents agree with the assertion that men are better at learning than women. This number climbed to nearly two-thirds, 65.56%, when participants were asked about ability in natural sciences and engineering. Conversely, more than two-thirds, 68.95%, thought that women's ability in social sciences and humanities were better than men's. Approximately 40% agree that men often do not want to love or marry a woman who has a higher education than they have. Moreover, 87.7% of the participants agree that men should continue to attain education at highest level possible, whereas only 66.5% agree that women should continue to pursue education at highest level possible. And women hold a stronger pressure with regard to women education than men. Women and men report a significant different attitude to and perception to gender in education. More women are more likely than men to agree with the following statement. Now, because one, men often study better than women. Two, men are often better than women in natural sciences. Three, women are often better than men in social science. Women should study only a certain level in order to save time for building a family. Five, men often don't love or marry women who have higher education than themselves. Six, uh, family is often unhappy with the wife has higher education than her husband. Although the gap does not seem large, gender inequality in education still exists in Vietnam. Compared to men, more women lack education. Generally speaking, more men plan to study high than women. Women often face barriers to continue their study because of reasons related to family issues, such as getting married, having children, or helping with household chores. Prejudice regarding women education is still widespread. In general, women are perceived as less capable than men in education and not as good as men in natural sciences. More importantly, women in higher education is perceived as threat to their marriage and marital relationship. This implies women should place their family above their education. More women hold gender prejudice with regard to women education. Yet changes are taking place in people's perception. The younger the persons are and the higher education they have, the less prejudice they hold. Now, the last part very important. The governmental effort to improve gender equality right now. The Vietnamese government recognized that it faced an uphill battle while most of its incarcerated population is literate. There are many small underserved pockets throughout the country that contain with high illiteracy rate. Moreover, while national attendance rates are good in primary school, chronic absenteeism is still beginning to manifest more frequently as women get older. Those triple trends indicate Vietnam's pervasive societal attitude toward gender and education. There are still many areas where women must tend to be to the home rather than their learning and futures. After its 2015 Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the United Nations acknowledged the concerning issue of gender inequality and violation of women's rights in Vietnam. The presence of such bias in education in the national mainstream consciousness would have far-reaching consequences for the country's future. The fight for equal rights for women in today is a crossroad. Confronted with the CEDAW committee fighting, Vietnamese government officials claim that any shortcomings are temporary delays due to financial constraints. In contrast, the evaluators state that the real roadblock to women's rights in Vietnam may lie in the governing party lack of political will. In any case, more work lies ahead as the countries grapple with how best to make its plans women's rights in Vietnam into measurable reality. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Phan. Thank you for your research and your analysis. And as our guests are formulating some questions for our speakers, please kindly enter your questions in the Q&A box. We greatly appreciate it. Our next topic is in inequality in health and security, and it is presented by Dr. Như Phúc Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen graduated from the School of Medicine, University of Saigon, Vietnam. He is also the first lieutenant military doctor of the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces. and member of the Alliance for Vietnam's Democracy and Vietnam Democracy Center. Please welcome Dr. Nguyen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here to discuss about the inequality of healthcare and security in Vietnam. For security, the women's health, safety, and security are not protected. Their rights, dignity, and values are infringed. A practice which illustrates A practice which illustrates this is Vietnam's marriage brokering, which differs little from trafficking. For decades, the party allowed marriage brokering in Vietnam until questions were raised by the Vietnamese Community Board and the Free World. Even now, there is still a continuous flow of Vietnamese brides overseas. The number For the security, the number of synthetic drug use in Vietnam has jumped sixfold since 2017. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has said in a report, according to Vietnam's authority, there has been an increase in the number of women employed in illegal drug trafficking and transportation. In the first 6 months of 2021, of the 164 subjects arrested for being involved in the illegal trafficking and transportation of narcotics, 22 were women. For healthcare availability, the availability of healthcare varies widely across Vietnam. The provision of adequate healthcare to women, however, is even further complicated by the low status of women within the family unit. Women's workloads in Vietnam are strenuous. The invisibility of women's contribution is our one critical component to understanding the lack of healthcare access. Since women are not seen as integral to productivity, their health is not deemed an important investment. So services directed at women are poor, non-existent, or underused. The inadequacies of health system are illustrated by the contraceptive issue. Women in Vietnam face many health complications arising from IUD intrauterine devices use. Part of the problem stems from the lack of follow-up by medical practitioners. Especially for women in rural areas, receiving proper medical attention is a function of the amount of time and energy it takes to get to the facilities and providers. In addition, when women have low status within the household, addressing their health concerns and needs receive little priority. Quality of health care also is a problem. The government has done little to combat the misconception about the reproductive health beyond the attempts of the Vietnam Women's Union, VWU, to go into homes to educate women on the benefits of lower fertility. Most of public media education has been just propaganda. Women have no reproductive rights. The party dictates the number of children per family. Parents and individuals are forbidden to choose the gender of the unborn child. According to the 2020 proposed bill, families are subjected to having 2 children only. Healthcare workers must obey the laws and regulations requiring by workers not to assist the couple in choosing the gender of the unborn child. Workers are not disclosed information about gender of the unborn child unless for medical care and or the treatment of gender-related illnesses, diseases. The party dictates future gender imbalances with more males to be born than females. The proposed bill states that gender equality means on the average, the number of naturally alive newborn males would be 103 to 107 as compared to 100 naturally alive newborn females. Vietnam has not achieved a process of family planning which does not unnecessarily harm or overburden the health of women. Methods are still limited and aimed at women, as the vast majority of men do not involve themselves in pregnancy prevention. Many women in Vietnam are still suffering from communicable diseases, especially reproductive tract problems and HIV or AIDS. A study revealed that about 32% of female migrant workers reported having reproductive tract infections. More women involved in drug transport, sale, and use, the widespread violence, drug, and the verbal, physical, sexual abuse, and assaults in schools. There are increased reports of violence in schools where female students being beaten physically, verbally, and emotionally abused or even tortured by other female classmates. One can find daily news about increased rape and sexual violence towards women, female teachers, and children, including in boarding schools. In several cases, criminals are communist cadres who receive acquittal, I'm sorry, or minimal to no legal consequences. But UNICEF 2021 report, violence against women and children increased in 2021, stretching an under-resourced and uncoordinated protection response in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen, and thank you for your analysis. Next, attorney Christina Tha, JD, speaks about political inequality for Vietnamese women. Ms. Tha currently practices finance and lending law in Winstead, PC. She obtained her Juris Doctorate degree from SMU Deedman School of Law and a Master of Fine Arts in Writing from Sarah Lawrence College. In her free time, she volunteers for moot court coach for the Thomas Tang moot court team and is a chair uh, member of the Asian American Bar Association. Please welcome Attorney Ta.
Hello, thank you for the kind introduction. Give me just 1 second. So hello, my name is Christina Ta, and today I'm here to talk about the unequal representation of women in Vietnamese politics. I think it's important to talk about how women's interests are poorly represented by the Vietnamese government. Vietnam doesn't allow for free and fair elections, and this ends up resulting in a closed political system that often creates disadvantages and biases against women. Now, before we can get much further, I think it's important to first combat Vietnam's current narrative on this issue. Vietnam likes to boast about its achievements in gender equality. It likes to talk about how the World Economic Forum of Gender Gap in 2021 ranked it 87 out of 156 countries in terms of gender equality. It likes to talk about how that same organization gave it a score of 0.701 on a scale of 0 to 1 in the gender gap. And finally, it loves to talk about how its National Assembly has a 27% female representation level. However, I think if we look at these at 27%, it can safely say that it beats Japan at 10%, South Korea at 19%, and even the United States at 23%. However, looking at these numbers and data alone ends up telling a story that I think is a bit out of context. So I ask that we dig a little bit deeper, and I ask that we look past all of these pretty statistics and instead to look at these numbers in the context of women's practical realities and Vietnam's actual political structure. And in doing so, I think that you will see that a different picture begins to emerge. So let's look at Vietnam's political structure. Vietnam's political structure is actually fairly simple, but I'm going to simplify it just a little bit more. Vietnam only has one political party, which is the Communist Party of Vietnam. It has a totalitarian government structure, so all decision-making authority flows top down. Now, Vietnam again likes to boast that it has a 27% female representation in the National Assembly. However, unlike a democratic system of government where different political bodies have the ability to check and balance each other, that's just simply not the case here. The National Assembly doesn't have the ability to say no to the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, it is internationally notorious for simply being a rubber stamping body which approves of the Communist Party's agendas and policies. Therefore, the members of the National Assembly, including the women in it, are politically silent. They don't have the ability to really enact any political change or to enact policies for the betterment of women. Now, if we're to look at the actual representation of women in Vietnamese politics, then we really need to look at the top of the government, at the positions of powers where they can actually enact political change. And in doing so, we will find that there are only two relevant bodies, which is the Central Committee and the Politburo. And when we look at the Central Committee, we come to find out that only 19 members out of 200 are actually women. And of those 19 members, only one is a member of the Politburo. And there are only 18 members in the Politburo total, making female representation at a low of 5.5%. This means that female representation in Vietnam's political structure is actually only 9.5%. This puts it below Japan, South Korea, and the United States. But I ask that we dig even one level deeper now. And I want us to look at women's actual roles in the Vietnamese political system. And when we look at that, we come to find out that even when women are involved in politics, they are often relegated to positions relating to social affairs rather than strategic committees. For example, let's look at the local level. Women account for 10% of the political party in Vietnam's provinces and communes. However, when we look at their actual roles in the political party, we find that they are limited to the following. They're limited to the committees for education, the Committee for Youth and Children, the Ethnic Council, and Social Affairs. They are often barred from the following committees. They are not a part of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Committees for Science and Technology, or for Economics and Budget. That means that women's voices and ability to enact real political change are severely limited in Vietnam. And that stymies their ability to enact policies for the betterment of women. Now, why are women's voices so limited in Vietnam? A huge reason for this is Vietnam's Women's Union. Vietnam's Women's Union has a monopoly on female political voices. That's because it's a byproduct of the Communist Party, meaning it's a part of that top-down structure that we were talking about before. And like the National Assembly, it doesn't have the ability to check and balance the top pieces of the government. That means that they are subject to the whims and wills of the people in the committee, Central Committee and the Politburo, which are ultimately run by men. Any woman that tries to strike their own path independent of this union are often labeled as political dissidents. And these women who try to enact change for the betterment of women, they end up facing a lot of criminal charges by the Vietnamese government, and they are subject to emotional extortion as well. And when they are a part of these criminal proceedings, they are often denied a right to counsel. They are sometimes deprived of their children in violation of the Vietnamese criminal code. And even when they are able to escape from the web of criminality in Vietnam, they are nevertheless still subject to economic and social pressures, like evictions from their homes and employment termination. Now, Vietnam seeks to silence these female dissident voices, to muzzle them. But these female political dissidents, their voices are essential to representing women's interests in Vietnam. It's only by allowing voices of real women who exist out of Vietnam's current political structure, which is ultimately being controlled by men, only by letting these voices come into the picture are real women able to have the ability to enact change in Vietnamese politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ta. Thank you for your research and your analysis. And thank you to all of our speakers for highlighting women's rights and issues under Vietnamese communism. The roadmap to human dignity and dignity for women and girls in a closed society like Vietnam is the route that builds a democratic society. And thank you for your research. And we will continue to share our thoughts and ideas in the next session, which is the question and answer. We certainly welcome all the answers that our participant has entered in. And I'm seeing here that we have a question on women's health. Someone is wondering if we have experience regarding the health issues that women are faced. I was wondering if any of our speakers could answer that question.
Ms. Lingman, would you please repeat the question, please?
Yes. Do you have any experience regarding health issues that women face? Do you want to take?
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead and take that question.
Yeah, I I have experience working in the hospital and other medical centers, even in some mobile medical services in Vietnam. So for the health issues, after occupying South Vietnam in 1975, The communists forced young men and women in South Vietnam at that time to join the Youth Volunteer Force, or they call it Thanh niên xung phong in Vietnamese, which essentially was Hanoi's front of forced labor. Those young males and females were sent to remote areas, on battlefields with explosive remnant of war, toxic soil and materials. For example, places with orange agent and other harsh conditions. As a result, those youngsters suffer from numerous illnesses, infectious disease, hunger, malnutrition, environmental poisoning, death, injury due to the leftover bombs and explosive items, dangerous animals, psychological issues, and so on. Not to mention the long-term consequences on the future generation that Hanoi always tries to cover up. For safety and security issues, in addition, during the 1977 to 1978 in Cambodia War, Hanoi sent several troops in youth volunteer force to Cambodia to transport weapons. Those troops were not armed with appropriate weapons to defend themselves. Each unit of 100 people about was provided with only one soldier, I mean the gunboat, and one rifle to protect the unit. As a result, many units of females were raped and murdered en masse, and their naked bodies were disposed in the forest. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with Vietnam education. The question is, what recommendation do you suggest to improve the gender equality in Vietnam education? I was wondering if anyone could take that question.
Yeah, I can do that, Ms. Lin.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, as educated in US, it's really different from the system from US and to Vietnam. But based on my experience and my research, okay, there should be some like a top-down approach, okay, before the top, because based on uh, the government decision, they have to enhance the capacity of education sector to ensure gender equality in planning and management and to increase access to quality education for girls and women, includes those in disadvantaged and vulnerable situation in rural and urban area. And in order to do that, you need more women in terms of, represent them in the Congress or in the top uh, government to issue further legislation regarding gender equality in both education and wide society in order to close the gap between policy and practice. It's the first thing. The secondly, something from Department of Education by gender mainstream in curriculum and textbook development and teaching practice. And they have to improve the training Vietnam school leader that and teachers in terms of gender equality, especially in relation to the learning activities in providing school, and to amend the Vietnamese curriculum in order that it should be more gender neutral. And next thing, to develop teaching training program in order to give greater emphasis to gender issue in the curriculum and to encourage practice classroom strategy to address such issue in the educational environment. And lastly, I think it's very important and difficult to do that from society view by raising awareness on gender equality and girls education among students, parents, community members, and the media. And because they're focused on Confucian value, which uphold a male-dominated hierarchy. Harry still criticism for placing too much emphasis on women's roles on family structure. And furthermore, while their efforts have worked toward improvement women's status, but they face a criticism for their lack of advocacy toward women's power. Okay, so it's very hard to break that barrier. And remember, Vietnam is very famous, okay, proud of the famous story of the Trưng sister queen and the woman warrior Lady Jill, who remind us that there's no articles for women in assuming leadership in Vietnam society for a long time ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in a similar vein, we have a question on how to close the gap on the gender equality in Vietnam social taboo on women that's rooted in Vietnamese culture, and was wondering how that could be overcome, this social problem, and close the gender equality. And what are the benefits when we remove that obstacle of gender gap? I was wondering if anybody could help with this follow-up question.
I think I can take that. Before I can answer the question, let me add something to Professor Hung about the women. There's another very pressing issue that we have to look at because of the culture of Vietnam. They seem to favor the male. So most of the people who would send abroad to study to get a PhD to become professor in Vietnam mostly are male. So if you go back to Vietnam University, which I visited quite often, and you find out that most of the high-powered professor are those who get a degree from overseas, and underneath them there are a bunch of assistant or lecturer female. So in that regard, it is very difficult to change the mentality of the males in Vietnam because they control all the university, and from there the curriculum and every educational philosophy is derived from that. So in order to correct that problem, I think the government should have to encourage and send more women or ladies overseas to get a doctorate degree to staff the university system. Otherwise, it will be the deadlock right there. I go back to the question that we asked. In fact, I still hold the fact that one of the major problems for the inequality in economic in Vietnam is the well-known taboo that we have from the tradition that we hold for thousands of years. Okay. And before I answer the question, let me offer you some observation that I have. The data on the social issue collected by the and reported by the government is self-reported. You do the survey and people report it. And people are in the society adhering to the three diktats or taboo from the Confucianism or similar taboo. Therefore, they're not going to tell you the truth. Right. Then recent social trend in phenomena such as more women drinking, renting husband and boyfriend in South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan is a very popular situation. But in this society, nobody reported or admit that when they answered the survey in question. Okay, so this revolution, women revolution, suggests that their resentment of the social norm, but they didn't report it. Okay. Another thing we look at is the social economic advancement of migrant Vietnamese women in all social statuses, in both in absolute term and as a women to men comparison in Vietnam. Women, when they are liberated from the social norm, they do very well. You look in the United States, there are a lot of women who do very well. In fact, in some group, they do much better than men. Okay. Because of that, I think that the through educational philosophy reflected in the attendant curriculums, legislation, social media, and other means that Vietnam may be in a directed process. If you want to liberate it in no direction, it will create a chaos in society. So you have to liberate it, but in some way that you would direct it to a objective that you would like to do by liberating women. Now, what is the benefit to it? We have to know that 50% of the population are women. So if you liberate them from the three, taboo, it would bring the better gender equality for sure, better utilization of labor force. Right now, they get in favor of male. We also increase the contributions of women to the society, to the economy, as well as increase the country GDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. We have one last question in our system. It regards the accountability of child sex trafficking, and how the government is not accountable when it comes to child sex trafficking, and what activities in the government that would give us evidence that possibly that the government is partaking into these or condoning these trafficking activities. I was wondering if any of you want to take this question.
Yes, Ms. Ling, I think I can answer that question. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me?
Ma'am.
Okay. The party actually treats Vietnamese citizens as goods due to the fact that the huge amount of money, the currencies come from Vietnam, from Vietnamese living abroad and laborers working overseas. In 2021, UNICEF reports indicated that violence against women and children increased, including sexual abuse, online child abuse, exploitation, but underreported by the government. In 2022, the US Department reported that Vietnam did not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking and is not making significant efforts in combating the crimes. On the contrary, authorities at times reportedly harassed and pressured survivors and their families in an effort to silence allegations of official complicity. Hanoi did not hold criminally or administratively accountable for two Vietnamese diplomats who were allegedly complicit in subjecting Vietnamese nationals to trafficking abroad. Hanoi did not criminalize all forms of child sex trafficking, a practice inconsistent with international law. The social media criticized the government and the courts for inappropriate handling of sexual abuse and assault cases when it came to cadres and government officials. A bank, for example, a bank CEO who was condemned of multiple sexual assaults of children only received 18 months suspended sentence after the guy threatened to burn his body ID and self-immolate, which he never had to because the court said that he was old, in parentheses, to stand trial. And some cadres only get transferred or demoted for sexual assaults of children. Only the offenses who are civilians are persecuted. And I think and that's the answer for your question. The audience question. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. Gao Taihai raising his hands. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I do not have a question to ask. I just want to express my opinion in supplement to the answer that Dr. Chu Nguyen presented before Ms. Vân Nhã. My presentation, my view is that when we talk about the reason, the root cause for women inequality in politics or in social standing in Vietnam currently, And Dr. Nguyen attributed that to the culture of the Vietnamese. I beg you guys take a look at the presentation from Cao So Christine Tha. She compared Vietnam current Vietnamese government with Japan, Korean, and US. But the true percentage is low way before, compared with Japan, Korean, and United States. What is the difference? The other three have a common denomination. That is, they have a country with the rules of law, respect, multi-party, the freedom of people to choose, on and on and on. Only Vietnam, in that comparison chart that Cao So Christian Tha presented, that even specifically called Vietnam is a single communist, Vietnamese Communist Party control, and everything is top down. So there is absolutely nothing to allow or encourage women participation. So as I take it, if we neglect to point it out that it's not, I granted the culture is there, but also the government, the communist government, doesn't do anything to elevate that, but also aggravate that, add to that. If you compare culture, for example, I give you the example, evidence. Communist China, Soviet Union, North Korean, do they have the same problem with Vietnam? Yes, there is no woman in North Korea. But if you look at South Korea, they even have a former president was a woman. China, Communist China versus Taiwan, the same Chinese heritage citizen culture. But if you look across, Taiwan is currently has a woman president. And you look at China, Communist China, do they have a woman in any power, let alone a president? And then you turn around and you look at Western culture, the Soviet Union, for over 70 years after the kingdom of the Russian king, they have not had a single woman leader in the Soviet Union. They still don't now in Russia. So my point is that it's not just the culture, but the main reason is the communist government. But if you look at if you do the research, before the communists took over in 1975, the former Republic of Vietnam, even had women in leadership, women in Congress, women in Senate, women everywhere.
Yes, sir.
So it's not the culture, it's a communist party. Again, I want to elevate that. It's not the culture, it's a communist. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have one last question from Miss Jackie Bone Wright. If you unmute yourself, you could ask a question to our panelists.
To chat the speaker chat the guest chat comments. I think that I agree with you completely, but I think I invited you to go back to our presentation. I think we argued that the Vietnamese Communist Party hide behind the social norms to advance their objective. So our presentation is not different what you're saying. And also you got to understand that Vietnam is not advanced yet. So women there cannot have money to hire boyfriend or husband, go drinking that much, but over the long run, they will go to that point. So not only that you have to look at the Vietnamese government, you have to have a direction of how you liberate them, or how you will go to a situation where you cannot control. When you get the genie out of the bottle, you cannot bring it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Jackie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? We're ready for you. You need to unmute at the mic. Oh, we can see you. If you would enable your microphone, then we can hear you. Oh, possibly next time. Sorry. Okay, so
I think you should be able to try it now, Ms. Jackie.
Go ahead, Miss Jackie. You should be able to
Now the mute again.
unmute now. Enable your microphone. I think, oh, okay. If you could type it out, maybe I could read it out for everybody. And let me go ahead and move forward. And we want to thank everybody for this very insightful and lively discussion. We want to end with a closing remark. As we observe the International Democracy Day, we are reminded that 100 million Vietnamese are not free. As Vietnam does not allow for free and fair elections, this closed system furthers bias against women and girls. To have the most impact on this issue and bolster our democracy promotion globally, we need to focus its diplomatic efforts to assist civil society and independent organizations in their efforts to educate women and girls in their rights and opportunities. Vietnam has a large number of female political prisoners and prisoners of conscience. Their plights have been largely overlooked. We believe in the need to hold Vietnam accountable and sanction Vietnam for its violation of women's rights. By applying current legislation such as the Global Magnitsky Act, we also need to empower women by aligning ourselves with their struggle and help promote better political participation from women to protect their rights. Just 2 days ago was the birthday of Trung Chắc of the Trung sisters. They are the Vietnamese female military leaders in the 40 AD revolution against the Chinese rule of Vietnam. Trung Chắc was the first woman to be a Vietnamese general in the history of Vietnam. Vietnam's history is one of gender equality, and Vietnam can reclaim that culture, something that is incompatible with the current communist regime. Again, thank you to the speakers for the research and presentations of women's rights under Vietnamese communism. Thank you all for sharing your vision of a global democracy. Have a wonderful and safe day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.